In the dry summer of 2023, a year when the heat came in May and never left, every cornfield in Garrison County, Nebraska, was the color of dust and straw. Every field, that is, except for one. From the window of a Cessna 172 flying at 3,000 feet, you could see it clearly. A single 88-acre rectangle of defiant green in a vast 50-mile quilt of brown. That patch of land belonged to Elara Vance, and this is the story of the weeds she refused to kill. Let me tell you about Garrison County. It sits squarely in the 98th meridian west, the line that historically separates the wet east from the arid west. For 100 years, farming here was a gamble on the sky. But by 2023, the gamble had been replaced by a system. The system was corn, then soybeans, then corn again. The system was anhydrous ammonia fertilizer injected into the soil at a cost of $850 a ton. The system was genetically modified seed, resistant to the herbicide glyphosate, costing $340 a bag. And the system was the herbicide itself, sprayed from 120-foot booms that unfolded like mechanical wings from the sides of John Deere R4045 sprayers, each one costing more than the house the farmer lived in. The system was about control. It was about creating a perfect, sterile environment where only one thing was allowed to grow. In Garrison County, the system worked. Until it didn't. Elara Vance was 68 years old. She had farmed these 88 acres for 45 years, taking over from her father, Joseph, in 1978. Joseph had taken over from his father, Samuel, who had broken the prairie sod with a team of mules in 1919. Elara was known for being quiet and for a specific behavioral trait. She watched. While other farmers talked about markets and machinery at the co-op, Elara watched the sky. While they discussed the latest chemical formulations, she crumbled soil between her fingers, smelling it, feeling its texture. She wore her father's old canvas work coat far into the spring and her grandfather's felt hat into the fall. Her physical presence was minimal, her posture rooted. Her house was a simple 1,200 square foot clapboard structure built in 1922, and on the heavy oak dining table inside sat the source of her dissent. It was not a tablet or a laptop, but a leather-bound soil ledger, its cover worn smooth by the hands of 3 generations. It was filled with Samuel's spidery cursive, then Joseph's blocky print, and now her own neat script. They hadn't recorded just yields and profits. They had recorded the number of earthworms in a shovelful of soil after a spring rain. They noted the return of the meadowlarks, the depth of the frost, the taste of the water from the well. They recorded failures with the same dispassionate precision as successes. Page 114, dated July 30th, 1936. No rain, 62 days. Temperature 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Corn is gone. Topsoil is gone. Wind took it. Only thing holding the west pasture is the damn chicory. The ledger was not a business document. It was a memory. And in the spring of 2023, when the pressure to conform was at its absolute peak, Elara Vance chose to trust that memory over the confident promises of the modern world. The decision that led to her 88 acres of green began, as these things often do, in a community hall under the hum of fluorescent lights. The problem arrived in the county 2 years earlier, a stowaway in a batch of contaminated feed seed, Palmer amaranth. To the uninitiated, it's just a weed. To a corn farmer, it's a nightmare. It can grow 3 inches a day, produce 500,000 seeds per plant, and its thick, woody stalk can destroy a combine header. Worse, it had developed a resistance to glyphosate, the cornerstone of the Garrison County system. Farmers sprayed, and the Palmer amaranth kept growing. It was a biological insurrection, and it terrified them. This brings us to Mark Renslow. Mark was 38 years old, had worked for Agrichem Solutions for 12 years, and held a master's degree in agronomy from Iowa State University. He was the confident outsider. He wasn't evil, he was earnest. He drove a pristine Ford F-250, wore crisp, logoed polo shirts, and genuinely believed that his company's products were helping to feed the world. He was the friendly face of the system, and in February of 2023, he was the man with the answer. The answer was a product called Total Clear 7. He presented it at the annual Garrison County Growers Association meeting. 150 farmers sat on folding chairs in the community hall, the air thick with the smell of coffee and anxiety. Mark stood at the front, a PowerPoint slide projected behind him. The slide showed a field of dead weeds next to a field of thriving corn. The headline read, "Certainty in an Uncertain World." "Gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating with an easy confidence, "Palmer amaranth is a formidable enemy. Your existing tools are no longer enough. But this isn't about fighting last year's war." He clicked to the next slide, a complex chemical diagram. Total Clear 7 is a proprietary blend of 7 modes of action. It doesn't just kill the weed, it sterilizes the seed bank. It creates a soil barrier that lasts for 90 days. We are talking about a 99.8% weed-free field from planting to canopy. A murmur went through the crowd. That number, 99.8%, was intoxicating. It was the sound of control. He laid out the program. 1 pass with the pre-emergent spray, another post-emergent pass 45 days later. The cost was $42 per acre per application, a total of $84 per acre. For a farmer with 1,000 acres, that was an $84,000 investment. But Mark showed them the data. His slides projected a 15% yield increase due to the elimination of weed competition. At $6 per bushel corn, that translated into a net gain of over $100 per acre. The math was clean. It was logical. It was irresistible. Elara Vance sat in the back row, watching. She didn't take notes. Her hands rested on her knees. She listened to her neighbors, men she'd known her whole life. Dave Miller, who farmed the 1,200 acres to her west, leaned over to his son. "That's what we need. Hit it hard." John Schmidt, whose land bordered hers to the north, was already filling out the order form. By the end of the meeting, order forms for enough Total Clear 7 to cover 60,000 acres had been signed. A commission of over $250,000 had been generated for Mark Renslow. The system was working. After the presentation, as people mingled, Mark made his way to the back. He was a good salesman. He knew who hadn't signed. He saw Elara getting ready to leave. "Mrs. Vance," he said, extending a hand. His smile was genuine. "Mark Renslow, I was hoping I'd have a chance to talk with you. I noticed you farmed the old Samuel Vance place. Beautiful piece of land." Elara shook his hand. It was a brief, firm grip. "It is." "I hope you found the presentation informative. This amaranth is a real problem, and if one person in a section lets it go to seed, it affects everyone. We're really hoping for 100% participation in the county for the program to be fully effective. His tone was friendly, but the message was clear. Your weeds are my problem. Elara looked at him, her gaze steady. I don't spray. Mark's smile tightened slightly. He was used to some resistance, usually over price. He was prepared for that. Well, the cost can seem a bit steep, I understand, but our data shows a clear return on investment. We can even set up a financing plan. She cut him off, not rudely, but with a quiet finality. It wasn't the money. I don't spray anything. Now he was perplexed. This wasn't part of the script. He gestured vaguely toward the memory of his PowerPoint slides. But how do you control your weed? How do you protect your yield? I don't control them, she said, and my yield isn't the only thing I'm trying to grow. Mark chuckled, a sound of polite disbelief. He thought she was a hobbyist, a holdout from a bygone era. He decided to try logic, the bedrock of his profession. Mrs. Vance, with all due respect, we have science now. We can measure soil nutrients to the part per million. We can target specific metabolic pathways in plants. We understand the mechanisms. He paused, looking for the right words to bridge the gap between his world of data and hers of, what, superstition? Nostalgia? We don't need to guess anymore. Elara pulled on her canvas coat. She looked at the earnest, confident young man in front of her, a man who believed so fully in the numbers on his screen. She gave him the only explanation she had. The soil has a memory, she said. What you kill matters as much as what you grow. Mark Renslow had no answer for that. It was a statement from a different language, a different reality. It was not data. He just nodded, watched her walk out into the cold February night, and filed her away in his mind as a lost cause. A stubborn old woman on a small plot of land who didn't understand the realities of modern agriculture. The community's problem, not his. But he was wrong. It wasn't her that didn't understand reality. It was the other way around. Let me tell you about that soil ledger. It wasn't just a book. It was a 104-year-long conversation with 88 acres of land. Samuel started it in 1919 with a simple entry. Broke sod on the North 40. Soil is black and deep. Smells of rain. He didn't know it, but he was recording the carbon content of virgin prairie, a richness that would be spent like an inheritance by subsequent generations. The most important entries, the ones Elara's father made her read every winter, were from the 1930s. The Dust Bowl. While the official histories spoke of government programs and mass migrations, the ledger spoke of the soil itself. An entry from 1934. Miller's topsoil is in our kitchen. Schmidt's is in Kansas. The wind doesn't stop. Our west pasture is holding because of the deep roots. Joseph says they are weeds. I say they are anchors. He listed them. Chicory, dandelion, ironweed, compass plant. Plants the system would later declare war on. For Samuel Vance, they were the only reason he still had a farm. Joseph Vance's entries were different. He was a man of the chemical revolution that followed World War II. His early notes from the 1950s are full of excitement about 2,4-D and anhydrous ammonia. 1955. First time using atrazine. Not a weed in the field. The corn is clean as a pin. Yield 120 bushels per acre. Never seen anything like it. The numbers got bigger. The fields got cleaner. But other numbers started to change too. 1965. Dug for worms with Elara. Only found 3 in a spadeful. Used to be 20. And later, in 1972, the soil doesn't smell the same after a rain. It's quiet. Elara's father was a man caught between 2 worlds. He embraced the new tools, but was raised with the old wisdom. He taught Elara both. He taught her how to calibrate a sprayer nozzle, but he also taught her how to read the weeds. "See the lamb's quarters?" he'd say, pointing to a velvety green plant. "That means you've got good nitrogen and phosphorus. See the purslane? That means your soil is compacted, but that little plant is mining trace minerals for you." He called them his volunteer partners. He taught her that a perfectly clean field was a field with no information. It was a silent field. When Elara took over in 1978, the farm was chemically dependent. The soil was hard, lifeless. Her first few years, she farmed the way her father had taught her in his later years, with the chemicals and the big machines. But the ledger whispered to her. She read her grandfather's words about the damn chicory and her father's words about the quiet soil. In 1985, after a particularly bad year where input costs erased all her profit, she made a decision. She stopped. She started with one 10-acre plot. No herbicides, no synthetic fertilizer. She planted a complex cover crop mix in the fall, 15 different species of grasses, legumes, and brassicas. Her neighbors thought she was insane. Dave Miller told her she was planting weeds, but she was planting anchors. She was trying to get the soil to speak again. The first few years were difficult. Her yields were low. The weed pressure was intense. But she persisted. She used a cultivator to manage the weeds between the rows. She spent hours walking the fields, observing. And she wrote everything down in the ledger. 1988. Worm count in the test plot is up to 10. Soil is darker. Can push a spade in with 1 foot again. By 1995, she'd converted the entire 88 acres. She had taken the farm off the system. She was building her own. Her system was based on diversity. She never planted just corn. She planted corn with a low-growing cover of white clover. The clover fixed nitrogen from the air, reducing her need for fertilizer, and it shaded the soil, conserving moisture. Her weeds were part of the system. The deep-rooted chicory and dandelions she allowed in the buffer strips brought up minerals from deep in the subsoil. The milkweed she let grow in the fence rows brought the monarch butterflies. Her farm wasn't a clean, silent factory floor. It was a noisy, complex, living conversation. It was this conversation that Mark Renslow, with his 99.8% solution, had asked her to silence. She had refused. Spring of 2023 arrived. In April, the great machines rolled out across Garrison County. The 120-foot booms of the sprayers unfolded, and a fine mist of Total Clear 7 settled over the dark earth. The fields were sterilized, prepared for the corn. A week later, the planters came, inserting seeds with GPS precision into the weed-free soil. The result was beautiful in its uniformity. Perfect rows of emerging green shoots against a background of clean, brown earth. It was the picture of modern efficiency. Elara's farm was different. She planted her corn into a living mat of clover and winter rye. She didn't use a massive planter. She used an older, 6-row John Deere 7000, modified with sharp discs that sliced through the cover crop to plant the seed. Her fields didn't look clean. They looked messy. Life was everywhere. This brings us to the young inheritor, her nephew, Leo. Leo was 22, a senior at the University of Nebraska, studying business administration. His parents, Elara's brother and his wife, lived in Omaha. Leo was smart, ambitious, and deeply connected to the digital world. He was spending the summer with Elara before starting a job with a logistics company. And he was mortified. He drove the county roads in his aunt's old pickup truck and saw the neighbors' fields so neat and orderly. Then he looked at hers. "Aunt Elara," he said one evening at the oak table, unable to contain his anxiety, "it looks terrible. People are talking. Dave Miller's son asked me if you were having financial trouble." Elara was cleaning carrots from a garden. She didn't stop. "What else did he say?" "He said you're letting that Palmer amaranth get a foothold, that it's going to spread. He said his dad is worried." Leo's voice was filled with the second-hand shame of his peers. He saw the world in terms of quarterly reports and market share. His aunt's farm was an embarrassing outlier, a failure of management. "My costs for seed, fertilizer, and pest control this year," Elara said, laying a carrot on the cutting board, "are $112 per acre. Dave Miller's costs, after 2 passes of that new chemical, will be over $350. Ask his son about that number." Leo was stunned. He hadn't thought about costs, only appearances. "But what about the yield? That salesman said everyone else will get 15% more." "Maybe," Elara said. She pushed the ledger across the table toward him. It was open to a page from 1958. "Your grandfather wrote this, chased the last bushel and spent 2 to get it. Profit is in the margin, not the yield." She looked at her nephew, his face illuminated by the glow of the phone he'd just pulled from his pocket. "The system isn't designed to make the farmer profitable. It's designed to make the system profitable. There's a difference." Leo didn't understand. Not yet. He saw an old book and a messy field. He saw his aunt choosing to lose. He spent the next few weeks trying to avoid the neighbors, embarrassed by the chaotic, unprofessional look of the only home he'd ever known in the country. He saw weeds. Elara saw an army gathering to fight a battle he didn't even know was coming. The battle began in June. The heat arrived and settled over the plains like a wool blanket. The jet stream, the great river of air in the upper atmosphere, fractured and locked into a pattern that blocked moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. The sky turned a pale, hazy blue. The rain stopped. The official records at the county seat tell the story in numbers. Normal rainfall for June in Garrison County is 4.5 inches. In 2023, they received 1.2 inches, all of it in the first week. Normal rainfall for July is 3.8 inches. They received 0.4 inches from a single brief thunderstorm that was more wind than water. The temperature exceeded 95 degrees for 27 consecutive days from June 28th to July 24th. The corn, which enters its critical pollination phase in July, began to suffer. In the clean fields of Elara's neighbors, the effects were dramatic. The soil, bare and exposed between the perfect rows, was baked by the relentless sun. The surface temperature of that dark, bare earth reached 140 degrees on some afternoons. It became hydrophobic, unable to absorb water. The 0.4 inches of rain that fell in July didn't soak in. It hit the ground and ran off, taking particles of topsoil, fertilizer, and herbicide with it into the ditches. The corn plants, their roots struggling in the hot, compacted ground, began to show severe signs of stress. The leaves curled inward to conserve moisture, giving the plants a spiky, pineapple-like appearance. They began to tassel early, a desperate, premature attempt to reproduce before death. On Elara Vance's 88 acres, something different was happening. The mess that had so embarrassed Leo was now a shield. The clover, the vetch, the assorted volunteer plants, they formed a living mulch that shaded the soil. On the same 140-degree afternoon, the soil temperature in Elara's field, measured with a compost thermometer, was only 85 degrees. The difference of 55 degrees was the difference between life and death for the microbial community that drove the soil's fertility. The roots of the diverse plant life created a network of channels and pores in the soil. When the July thunderstorm arrived, the water didn't run off. It soaked in. All 0.4 inches of it were captured in the soil profile, a precious deposit in a bank account of moisture. Her corn plants were taller. Their leaves were a darker green, open and receiving the sun. They showed no signs of pineappling. They were stressed, yes, but they were surviving. They were more than surviving. They were waiting. Leo saw the change. He started walking the fields with his aunt in the evenings when the heat finally broke. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just showed him. She'd walk into Dave Miller's field, the soil so hard it crunched under her boots, and dig with a spade. It took her full weight to get the blade in. 2 inches down, the soil was bone dry, the color of ash. Then she'd walk back to her own field, step off the road, and push the same spade into the ground with one hand. It sank into the earth. She pulled out a clump of soil. It was dark, moist, and crawling with earthworms. She crumbled it in her hand, and it smelled rich, alive. "This is your resilience," she told Leo, letting the dark soil run through her fingers. "It's not in a jug, it's not in a bag, it's right here. It's the life in the soil." Mark Renslow drove the county roads every week, checking on the fields treated with Total Clear 7. In June, he was proud. The fields were immaculate. He took pictures for the company newsletter. In July, his pride was replaced by a growing unease. He saw the stressed, dying corn everywhere. He knew the drought was bad, a once-in-a-generation event. His product wasn't designed to make it rain. But then he would drive past Elara Vance's 88 acres. The first time he saw it, he thought it was a fluke, a low-lying area that had caught more runoff. But the green was uniform, across the entire field. He stopped his truck on the gravel road. He looked at the messy, weed-choked field, and then at the clean, dying fields all around it. It didn't make sense. His training, his data, his entire professional worldview told him that her field should be suffering the most, choked by competition for the little water there was. Yet her corn looked better, healthier. He called the county extension agent, a man named Tom Phillips. Tom was 60, a respected local figure. They met on the road by Elara's farm. They stood there, two men of science, staring at a result that defied their models. "She's got a hell of a weed problem," Tom said, shaking his head. "She's losing yield to all that competition." "I know," Mark said. "But look at the corn, Tom. Just look at it." They couldn't deny it. The stalks were thicker, the leaves greener. They stood there for 10 minutes in the oppressive heat, the silence broken only by the buzz of insects from Elara's fence rows. They were staring at a paradox, an anomaly that threatened the integrity of the system they both represented. They saw the result, but they could not or would not understand the cause. They saw the weeds as the problem, unable to comprehend that they were, in fact, the solution. The climax of this story did not happen in a boardroom or at a bank. It happened on a hot Saturday in August at the Garrison County Fair. Specifically, it happened at the annual soil health competition, an event usually attended by a few 4-H kids and their parents. This year, it was different. Word had gotten around about Elara Vance's field. The drought had broken the confidence of the farmers. Their system had failed them, and they were looking for answers. Nearly 50 farmers, their faces etched with the worry of a failed season, gathered to watch. The main event was the water infiltration test. It was a simple, visual demonstration of the soil structure and its ability to absorb water. The county agent, Tom Phillips, administered the test. His team had a 6-inch diameter steel ring, a mallet, a 1-liter bottle of water, and a stopwatch. The procedure was simple. Pound the ring 3 inches into the soil, pour in the liter of water, and time how long it takes for the water to disappear. They started in Dave Miller's field, just across the road from the fairgrounds. It was a field that had received 2 applications of Total Clear 7. It was perfectly clean. The corn stalks were brown and brittle, the yield a total loss. Tom pounded the ring into the baked earth. He poured the liter of water into the ring. The water sat there. It glistened in the sun, a perfect circle of unabsorbed potential. The farmers watched, silent. They were looking at their own fields. The stopwatch ticked past 1 minute, past 5 minutes. The water level had barely dropped. A crust of silt was forming on the surface, sealing it even further. Mark Renslow stood at the back of the crowd, his arms crossed, a pained expression on his face. This was the foundation of his entire program, this dead, sterile soil. Finally, the last of the water seeped away. Tom Phillips looked at his stopwatch and announced the result. His voice was flat. 14 minutes, 28 seconds. Then, the crowd of 50 farmers, a silent, somber procession, walked across the road. They stepped over the ditch and into Elara Vance's field. The difference was jarring. Here, the ground was soft. It was covered in a carpet of living clover and other low-growing plants. The corn stalks above them were still green. They had ears of corn on them. Not a bumper crop, but it was a crop. Tom found a representative spot between 2 corn rows. He placed the steel ring on the ground. He didn't need the mallet. He pushed the ring into the rich, dark soil with the heel of his boot. The crowd pressed in, forming a tight circle. Leo stood beside his aunt, his face filled with a nervous pride. Elara just watched. Tom held up the liter of water for all to see. He clicked the stopwatch and poured. It vanished. The water poured into the ring and disappeared as if into a sieve. There was a collective gasp from the crowd. It didn't pool. It didn't even puddle. It was simply gone, drunk by a thirsty, living soil. Tom looked at the empty ring, then at his stopwatch, his thumb still hovering over the button. He clicked it. He looked at it for a long moment, as if he didn't believe what it said. The official time was 11 seconds. For a full minute, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling the green corn leaves and the distant tinny music from the fairground midway. 14 minutes and 28 seconds. 11 seconds. The numbers hung in the air, stark and irrefutable. In that moment, everything changed. The farmers weren't looking at a messy, weed-choked field anymore. They were looking at the only functioning field in the county. They were looking at their own failure and her success. The weeds weren't competition. They were infrastructure. They were the architects of the soil's porosity, the unpaid workers who kept the farm alive. Mark Renslow stood at the edge of the crowd. He looked at his pristine, data-filled clipboard. He looked at the dark, absorbent earth inside the steel ring. And he looked at Elara Vance, who was now quietly explaining to a neighboring farmer that the clover's roots create channels for the water to follow. He didn't say a word. He slowly closed his clipboard, the soft click of the metal clamp an admission of defeat. The science he believed in wasn't wrong. It was just incomplete. It had measured everything but what mattered. Dave Miller, a man of 65 who had farmed these fields his entire life, a man who had mocked Elara's methods for 20 years, walked over to her. He ignored everyone else. He looked down at the soil, then at the green corn. His shoulders, which had been slumped with the weight of a lost crop, seemed to straighten. "Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "what have we been doing all these years?" She looked at her neighbor. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a shared sadness for what had been lost. "Forgetting," she said. Leo stood next to her, a silent witness. He was no longer the embarrassed nephew. He looked at his aunt, at this quiet, unassuming woman in a faded felt hat, and saw her for the first time. Not as an eccentric holdout, but as the keeper of a deeper wisdom. He finally understood. The ledger on the oak table wasn't about the past. It was a manual for the future. The aftermath of that day spread slowly, like water soaking into healthy soil. The drought of 2023 was financially devastating for Garrison County. When the harvest numbers were finalized, the story became even clearer. The county average corn yield was 45 bushels per acre, a catastrophic failure. The cost of inputs, including the $84 for Total Clear 7, meant that most farmers experienced a net loss of over $50 per acre. 4 farms, representing a combined 7,000 acres, declared bankruptcy by the following spring. Elara Vance's yield was 148 bushels per acre. In a normal year, that would be considered modest, but in 2023, it was a miracle. Because her input costs were only $112 per acre, she turned a profit of $312 per acre. On her 88 acres, that was a net income of $27,456. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a profit in a year of universal losses. The numbers told the story the soil already knew. Mark Renslow was transferred to a desk job in Omaha 6 months later. Sales of Total Clear 7 in Garrison County the following year dropped by 40%. Agrichem Solutions introduced a new product, Total Clear 9, with a new marketing campaign, but the spell had been broken. The farmer's belief in a chemical silver bullet had been washed away in that steel ring. Dave Miller did not go bankrupt. That winter, he showed up at Elara's door, hat in hand. He brought a notepad. He stayed for 2 hours. The next spring, for the first time in 50 years, Miller's fields were green in April. He had planted a cover crop of rye and hairy vetch. It was a start. Leo did not take the logistics job in Omaha. He stayed. He changed his major to agronomy and grassland ecology. He spent that winter at the oak table with his great-grandfather's ledger, carefully scanning each page. He was building a database, cross-referencing the handwritten notes with modern soil science, creating a bridge between the two worlds. He added his own entry after the infiltration test. August 12th, 2023. Water infiltration test. Miller Field, 14 minutes, 28 seconds. Our field, 11 seconds. 50 men saw the truth today. The wealth isn't in the yield, it's in the structure. He was becoming the fourth generation to keep the conversation going. The story of Elara Vance and her weeds is not about a magic bullet. It is not an argument to abandon all of modern science. It is a story about memory. The soil has a memory, and it remembers how to take care of itself. It remembers how to hold water, how to cycle nutrients, how to foster life. But decades of the system, a system of control and sterilization, had given it amnesia. All Elara did was help it to remember. True wealth on a farm is not the annual yield. It is the long-term resilience of the land. It is not about what you can add to the soil from a bag or a jug, but what you can allow the soil to build for itself. The pursuit of a clean, simple, controllable system creates a fragile one. The acceptance of a messy, complex, cooperative system creates a durable one. What is rigid breaks under pressure. What is diverse and interconnected bends, adapts, and endures. The ultimate lesson from those 88 acres of green was this: wisdom is not the power to control nature, but the humility to partner with it.